It's a very great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to this lecture by UN Undersecretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix. My name is Richard Kaplan, Professor of International Relations in the Department of Politics and International Relations here at Oxford, and I'm going to be moderating this event this afternoon. The lecture today by Mr. Lacroix marks the culmination of an exciting new initiative at Oxford, the Peace and Security Fellowship, which the Department of Politics and International Relations launched this year in partnership with the UN Department of Peace Operations, DPO. Its primary objective has been to allow serving UN practitioners, and there were 10 of them this year, the opportunity to step away from their day-to-day duties and with the support of academic mentors, which we provided, to spend one term at Oxford researching topics relevant to their professional responsibilities. So to bridge the gap in a very practical way between scholarship and practice. The fellowship's been supported with a very generous donation from Mr. Sai Prakash Leo Muthu, who is with us, but not physically with us at this moment in Oxford. He will be joining. From all indications, the fellowship has been a great success. The fellows who presented their preliminary findings at a seminar here in Oxford a couple of days ago presented on topics as wide-ranging as peace operations in terrorism-affected environments, the obstacles to the adoption of data-driven analysis, peace operations and private military companies, and food supply chains, and the persistence of armed non-state actors. So we plan to build on the success of this year's experience and hope to be able to host a new cohort of fellows next year and hopefully in years to come. The fellowship and the lecture this afternoon come at a very challenging time for the United Nations and for UN peacekeeping in particular. Historically, peacekeeping, UN and other, has been an important instrument for maintaining and building peace in conflict-affected states and territories. Academic studies, including scholarship produced by scholars at this institution, demonstrate that peacekeeping has made significant contributions to peace and security. For instance, studies have shown that peacekeeping operations often reduce immediate violence and prevent conflict from re-escalating, that peacekeepers provide security to civilians in conflict zones, that peacekeeping can prevent armed conflict from spreading to neighboring countries, and that peacekeeping can promote political dialogue and enable peace processes to take place. Now, these are just some of the achievements, the demonstrated gains from peacekeeping, and not in all cases, certainly, and not to the same degree, but very often. Now, despite these achievements, UN peacekeeping is at an inflection point, to put it diplomatically, at a time when there are more armed conflicts raging than at any other time since the Second World War. No wholly new UN peacekeeping operation has been deployed for more than a decade. Rather, peacekeeping operations have been terminated in Darfur, in Mali, and in Haiti, while others are threatened with closure. Meanwhile, the United Nations, and peacekeeping in particular, is facing a liquidity crisis unlike any other that it has faced in its history. And this is a crisis that arises from the failure of member states, one state stands out in particular, to meet its international legal obligations to the United Nations. As a consequence, UN peace operations were forced this year to implement very significant contingency measures, including a 15% cut in expenditures and the repatriation of 25%, one quarter of uniformed personnel. So how to navigate these rough waters is the topic of this afternoon's lecture. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, our distinguished speaker, is exceptionally well placed to address these challenges. He's been serving as UN Undersecretary General for Peace Operations since his appointment at the United Nations in April 2017. Mr. Lacroix has overseen UN peace operations through some of the world's most complex conflicts, including those in Mali, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Under his leadership at the Department of Peace Operations, the department has worked to improve the effectiveness and accountability of peacekeeping missions, to strengthen the protection of civilians, to integrate peacekeeping into political measures and political mediation and peace-building efforts, and to adapt peace operations to new emerging threats. I don't think that they're any longer emerging, they're very much with us. Terrorism, misinformation, and climate-related instability, among others. He brings more than 2 decades of political and diplomatic experience to this position, including as Director for United Nations, international organizations, human rights, and Francophonie at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2014 to 2017, and as France's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations. So please join me in welcoming Monsieur Lacroix, UN Undersecretary General for Peace Operations.
Thank you very much. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much, Professor Kaplan, for your introduction, and thank you for having me, but also thank you so much for having our colleagues, participating in the fellowship. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, I'm very grateful for the support, the welcome, the commitment to supporting the fellows as they have been working on very important topics that are germane and relevant to peacekeeping. So I think, Professor Kaplan, you already mentioned a number of challenges that we're trying to grapple with. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with you and hearing questions and really your support in terms of how we can jointly work towards making sure that multilateralism, and I'm not really speaking only about the United Nations, but the whole idea of multilateralism, how can multilateralism remain able to bring about effective responses to crisis? And I think that is really what is at stake there. And forgive me with this sort of very laborious pun, but seeing all these skeletons of dinosaurs in the museum, I was thinking, well, we're really working to avoid the fate of these animals. Anyway, now the first thing to say is that peacekeeping operations are absolutely not mentioned in the UN Charter. It's a creation, it's a very sui generis creation generated by crisis and opportunities. And I think the fact that it's not really anywhere to be found in the Charter has a few political implications, a lot of practical implications. I believe that this has allowed the system to be very creative, and there are lots of very diverse types of peace operation. At the same time, the UN is clearly a system that was absolutely not devised and envisaged for peace operations, and we have a number of rigidity and rules and that are really constraining us. Anyway, I'll get back to that later. Now, since 1948, the United Nations has deployed 71 peacekeeping operations. And I think that it's important, before talking to the various challenges that we're facing, that the list of countries that were successfully supported by peacekeeping operation in their returning to stability, that list is very long. From Cambodia in the 1990s, where our director, David Harry, in which you participated, David, all the way to Timor-Leste, the African countries of Sierra Leone, Liberia, Côte d'Ivoire, El Salvador, Mozambique, Angola. I'm not saying these countries are not facing challenges today, some of them serious challenges, but they don't need peacekeeping anymore. I mean, we were able to leave behind a much improved situation, both from the political point of view and the security point of view. Now, today we have 11 peacekeeping operations. They are in the Middle East, in Lebanon, Syria. They're in Jerusalem with this very sort of legacy operation, which is called UNSO. We have operations in Europe, in Cyprus, in Kosovo, and the rest is in Africa and Western Sahara, the DR Congo, Central African Republic, South Sudan, and this unsung disputed territory between Sudan and South Sudan, which is called Abyei. I think what is important to say is that these operations are very diverse in terms of the mandates, in terms of the size, in terms of the budget. The bigger ones are close to $1 billion each per year. The smaller ones are about 50 to 100 million per year. I want immediately to tell you that the overall budget for 1 year peacekeeping operation is about a bit less than $5 billion this year. It's not, as we used to say, 1% of military expenditure. It's 0.2%. It's 0.2% of military expenditure for a year. I believe that it's half of what the cost of preparing for this World Cup was. So just to give you an overview of, and my friend and your compatriot Tom Fletcher has a number of other very relevant comparisons to sort of also emphasize that the cost of humanitarian aid is also minimal, really, which would lead me to say later that the financial problem that we have is not really a financial problem, it's a political problem. Now, before coming to this, I think it's important to emphasize that most of the problem that we're facing as peacekeeping operations are not specific to peacekeeping. Of course, we are specific. We operate in specific ways in a conflict situation and so on and so forth. So, but I think that the key challenges that we're facing really are the challenges that are faced by multilateralism as a whole, international law as a whole, and I believe that it's important to bear that in mind. And some would argue that, like our fellow compatriot, half Italian, French, Giuliano d'Empoli has written a number of books, and he posits that this international order, which was created in 1945, was a sort of a temporary lull in what is usually a chaotic sort of international order. I beg to differ, but still, it's interesting to sort of bear in mind that we are a bit of at the crossroad. Are we going to be able to keep multilateralism? And frankly, I don't think that the UN as an organization is really an end in itself. What is an end in itself is the Charter. And we are the instrument to try to sort of promote and try to some extent bring in line with international law, the conflict situation and the violations that we were dealing with. Now, perhaps now turning to the challenges. I think we are facing challenges of essentially 3 or 4 natures. The first one is obviously a political challenge. I mean, we are now faced with a divided membership, a polarized, I would say bitterly polarized, increasingly so. I've seen that since I started in 1st of April 2017, increasingly bitter. We had the war in Ukraine, we had Gaza, we have Iran. I mean, so initially in 2017, it was already a very different landscape. relative to what I call, it's completely naive, the golden age of UN peacekeeping, the end of the 80s, 1990s. But now it's increasingly so. The Security Council is divided. And of course, what it means for us is that we depend on the appetite of our member states to respond to crisis in a multilateral and collaborative way. So if we, and that by definition presumes a degree of convergence, but if we have more polarization and division than convergence, then of course we are very much constrained, not only in terms of the creation of new peace operation, although I don't think that we should completely rule that out, and we have to be ready for that. I'll get back to that later. But what it means for the existing peacekeeping operation is two things. First, we are less supported and we're getting less strong, united and committed support to our own peacekeeping operation. An indicator of that is that the mandates which are extended every year or every 6 months of our peacekeeping operations are less often extended by unanimous vote of the Security Council, and that tells us a lot about what we can expect in terms of support from our member states whenever those operations face issues and difficulties with the host parties or the host government. And my colleagues who are working in the field know so well that we are facing so many of these difficulties day in, day out. The second challenge related to this division of the international community is the fact that peacekeeping is, whatever the mandate, is always a tool that is created to support political efforts towards a durable, sustainable solution to conflicts. Now, ultimately, the ideal way out for peacekeeping is when that political process is completed successfully. Again, Timor-Leste, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, you name it. But for these political efforts to move forward, it needs parties to play the game, parties to whatever political agreement they have entered into to play the game. And for that to happen, there's a need for a much more united, committed, and supportive international community to these political efforts. And frankly, in some cases, a united community, international community, ready to put some pressure on the parties to play the game and implement whatever they have, whatever commitment they've entered into. We don't have that anymore. And in the worst, in the best case, we have a lack of serious commitment, shifting attention because there are so many conflicts around the world. And in the worst cases, we have one group of countries supporting one party and then the other group of countries supporting the other party. And then what do we do? Because then if those political processes are not moving forward towards the ultimate settlement of whatever dispute or conflict in which we're involved, then our peacekeeping operations have to stay. They stay for decades, they stay for 20 years, 30 years, 15 years. And that creates, of course, many challenges for us, including sometimes the unfair or disingenuous perception or assertion that we fail. I beg to defer to that, especially if we look at what peacekeeping operations are created for and are mandated for. They're created to support, but they can't by themselves deliver a successful completion of political process. That's beyond what they can do. Just one example, sometimes I hear, you've been in Cyprus for 15, 50 years, 60 years, so and the situation of Cyprus has not been solved, so you failed. To which I say, no. Our peacekeeping operation in Cyprus is a resounding success because those parties who do not really talk to one another, except at the leadership level, they're not fighting each other. And by preventing the resumption of hostilities, we create space for those political efforts to continue. Now, the solution is elusive, but at least there still is a possibility for that political process to move forward. So similarly, you can say the same thing about other peacekeeping. But having said this, though, staying in the same territory, in the same country for decades and decades creates negative implication in terms of the expectations. There can be fatigue. There can be expectations that really exceed what we can do. In particular, when we're told, you were there to solve our problems and you're not solving our problem. We still have that conflict, raging. We haven't yet reached a solution to our crisis. And of course, at the time of those divisions, then the parties to a crisis, even if they have entered into some form of commitment, and commitment are never entered into good faith, in good faith, of course, they're just a platform on which then one has to build to reach ultimately durable solutions. But if the parties know that the international community is divided, that they can sort of play that game of playing one group of countries against the other, if they know that attention is shifting or is likely to shift from one situation to the other, then of course they're much less likely to really, like I said, play the game. Now, I believe that we have a second challenge, which is probably equally, if not more serious. And I call it the erosion of institutional legitimacy for the multilateral system, especially for the UN. And here, I think it's the key problem is the lack of reform, especially reform of the Security Council, which is, let's face it, almost impossible to achieve. I mean, 99%, who knows? And that sense of that the Security Council does not reflect anymore a world that has profoundly changed has an impact on us because we emanate from the Security Council. Our mandates are voted and extended from the Security Council. So we emanate from an institution that is seen as not fully representative of the international order or the international balance of power as it is today. And that creates a sense that we're not fully legitimate, and we may be seen as a sort of imposition from a group of countries that have their own agenda, and in a way, I mean, it's always true to some extent, but with a broader platform of member states, we would be better off from the point of view of legitimacy. Now, in addition to that, and I'll speak to that later, but we sometimes have mandates that are very broad, in their scope, and mandates are always the product of political negotiations, but they end up being, sometimes they're referred to, I mean, not the very simple ceasefire monitoring mandate like in Cyprus, but the mandates of big missions in Africa. We have monitoring human rights, and all of this is very important, by the way. I don't want to be misunderstood. We have, children in armed conflict. We have capacity buildings in the different sort of areas of state capacities, and those mandates are often referred to as Christmas tree mandate. And the problem is that we don't get the resources that are commensurate to the extent of the breadth of these mandates. And as a result of that, that creates all that heightened, raises expectation in terms of what we can do. And of course, that is a problem when we have a discrepancy between expectations and what we can really achieve. Now, in addition to that, in some of the situations in which we were involved, like Mali, we're also faced with challenges, at least some of them, which we couldn't really address as a peacekeeping operation, and that's particularly the case with terrorism, and I'll get back to that later as well. Now, actually, I'll get back to that now. The third group of challenges is really these operational challenges, in the sense that we have political and security environments of peacekeeping which have profoundly deteriorated for many reasons. First of all, we've been grappling with the non-state actors. That is not new, of course, but increasingly involved in different activities, overlapping sometimes, terrorism, transnational illegal activities, the plundering of natural resources, all kinds of illegal trafficking, and now the return of private security companies, which, as you know, predate formed regular armies, but now they're back and serving all kind of purposes. Plus the increased impact of various drivers of conflict. I mentioned terrorism and the impact of transnational criminal activities, which I believe is often very high on the list of drivers of conflict in the situation in which we are involved, but also the impact of climate change, which is very, very serious and visible in so many of the crises that we're dealing with. And the question is then, how do we adapt to these challenges? How and to what extent can we, as peacekeeping, respond to these challenges? And what could we do and what could others do, because we wouldn't be able to really address effectively those challenges. Now, in addition to that, you have the evolution of the enablers. In other words, the technological evolution, digital technology, AI, and here I don't need to belabor that too much, but that really creates a very fast changing landscape of the threats that we are facing, that our peacekeepers are facing, but also that the population that we're serving are also facing. Mis and disinformation, new forms of attacks against our peacekeepers, like, for example, drone. At the end of last year, we had the first drone attacks to one of our camps in Kadugli, Sudan. We had 6 peacekeepers from Bangladesh killed as a result of these attacks. 3 drones falling on our camp. That was definitely deliberate. And we're seeing more sophisticated IED, that is improvised explosive devices attacks. And of course, I mentioned mis and disinformation, which is really a weapon. It's always been in conflict situations, but now, of course, with the scope and the massive enabling capacity of AI and digital technology, it's a different scale. Now, the fourth and last challenge that we face is the financial challenge. Again, to me, it's just a consequence of the political challenge. The amounts that are at stake are minimal, but we have been always, by the way, grappling with arrears. Member states, and particularly the bigger and the biggest financial contributors to peacekeeping, you're not paying always what they had to do, what they had to pay, basically, as a result of their institutional obligation. But lately this year, as was mentioned by Professor Kaplan, we had only partial payment from our number one financial contributors, that is, the United States. And as a result of that, we had to save 15% of our liquidity, and that translated into a cut to the tune of about 25% in the military, the police, the civilian, the operational expenditures. And our colleagues in the field have been working hard, day in, day out, to achieve what was really indispensable to basically prevent our peacekeeping operation from filing a bankruptcy before 30th of June, which is the last day of our budget year. Now, we hope that we will be able to overcome these financial challenge. And really one of the big question mark, which is very immediate to us, is, are we going to be able to return to a situation where all the member states pay more or less in full and on time or not? If that is not the case, then, and if we have to do again what we did with the contingency plan, then we will enter a new phase where I believe we will be very quickly in a position, forced to tell our member states, look, we cannot anymore implement the mandates that you gave us. And please, member states, do whatever you think you have to do in that, in that context. Now, I will then move to the question of for how do we respond to that? But before sort of suggesting a few avenues whereby we think that we can sort of address these challenges, or at least try to sort of mitigate them, I think it's important to get a sense of what peacekeeping can do and what it cannot do. And I've already suggested that peacekeeping is a tool. It's one tool at the disposal of the UN, the international community, together with other tools. It never works well alone. It has to be complemented by political efforts. It has to be complemented by other stakeholders in the field, we always work with humanitarian actors very closely. So, I mean, it's almost an intimate sort of cooperation and relation, particularly in the big mission like in South Sudan or in DR Congo, where we protect every single day hundreds of thousands of civilians, hundreds of thousands every single day, sometimes protected exclusively by our peacekeepers, and then getting the kind of humanitarian assistance that they need because they're protected by those peacekeepers, and they're getting then the support of our humanitarian colleagues. We have to have those partnerships, and I believe that it's important again to emphasize that peacekeeping always acts, within a broader framework, within a framework that is, first of all, a political platform, a political objective of supporting those goal of achieving a political solution, but also having to work with partners from that point of view, from the point of view of the political efforts with the regional, sub-regional organization and relevant member states, but also working in the field with all these other actors, the UN agencies and the EU, the AU, and of course NGOs, very much so, very, very important partner as well. Now, the second thing is, all right, if political processes are elusive, if in Cyprus or in the DR Congo or in South Sudan or Western Sahara, Kosovo. I mean, if these political solutions are seen as not likely to achieve any significant progress in the next month of year, then what is it that we do? What is it that and then I submit, that there is a difference between the ultimate objective of peacekeeping, which is to, again, support a successful completion of a political process, and what I call the intermediate goals, which are very important, but they are only intermediate. Preventing a ceasefire from unraveling, like in Cyprus or in Western Sahara, or protecting hundreds of thousands of civilians, which, by the way, in itself is also a way of mitigating violence. So these are intermediate goals. I think it's important to highlight and emphasize the importance of these achievements, because that's what our peacekeepers do day in, day out. And the proof of this added value was found not only in what the civilians that we protect tell us, but also in what happened when peacekeeping operations were prematurely removed or unceremoniously kicked out, like what happened in Mali. That is to say, when they had to go before the successful completion of these political processes. This happened in Mali because the new authorities of that country wanted us to leave. It happened also in Darfur, more or less for the same reason, although we were on the way out, but still, that was very much accelerated by the new authorities, and it also happened in Haiti. Even though there were lots of things said about this mission in Haiti, I can tell you, because I was there in 2017, 2018, and nobody was talking about security anymore in Haiti. The problem was considered solved. What was not solved, though, was the political dispensation, was the ultimate stable political dispensation in Haiti, which then takes us back to, the importance of complementing peacekeeping with peacemaking. But I'm saying this because I think it's important to bear in mind that even at a time where, we're really having a hard time achieving the kind of successes that took place with Cambodia or Timor-Leste or Sierra Leone, then, that doesn't mean that our peacekeeping operations do not have that added value in helping people and really preserving very unstable situation from falling into complete chaos, thus, of course, completely undermining any chance of political processes. Now, having said this, though, I mentioned what peacekeeping can do and what we cannot do. And here, we have really a question that is complex, because I do believe that if you think about what the key criteria, what the key precondition for peacekeeping is, I believe that it's the existence of an agreement between conflicting parties. It can be just a ceasefire, or it can be a much broader political sort of agreement with different phases and steps and all that kind of thing. If we don't have that, it doesn't make sense to send peacekeeping, because what is it that we will be supporting? Maybe peace enforcement can be warranted, but not peacekeeping. Now, of course, the things are a bit more complicated than that, because we can be deployed on the basis of a political agreement, a political platform. A resolution of the Security Council can also be a political platform for a solution, but that doesn't mean that on the ground there won't be spoilers, there won't be armed groups, there won't be parties not really interested in our success, and sometimes very much interested in our failure and in the failure of peace, because if you are in the business of illegally exploiting natural resources, you don't want the UN to succeed. Actually, you're very much interested in chaos and the continuation of it. And sometimes you have terrorist group. Again, you can be a terrorist in the night and involved in illegal transnational activities in the day, or the other way around. The line is very blurred. And you have now at your disposal all these sophisticated devices. So you can really be a serious threat to us and to the civilians. So then the question is, okay, how robust peacekeeping is? I think it's important, first of all, because sometimes we have, part of the misunderstanding is, well, you should be more robust, you should really go after. And like I said, I mean, we need to have a political agreement as a platform for peacekeeping, so we don't really wage war. But then, we have also robust mandates, so-called Chapter 7 mandate, and we need to use this to protect civilians, as one of the three principles of peacekeeping says, to protect our mandate. But when the mandate is about protecting civilians, then we have to use force to protect civilians, i.e. our mandate. But how far can that go? How much of a risk are we ready to accept? And how much of a risk are our member states and our troop and police contributing country ready to accept? And it's very much an open question, really. I think one that needs to be explored further, I believe. Now, we have made some progress conceptually in the sense that now there is a better platform, a political one, for the support, and particularly the financial support from the UN to non-UN, particularly peace enforcement operation. And one of the key step that was taken by Security Council was the adoption of a resolution, which is Resolution 2719, which provides for the possibility of supporting those AU, African Union operation with the tool of assessed financial contribution coming from the UN and a number of other ways in supporting them. Now, I want to add something maybe to what I'm saying is, as much as I say that, peacekeeping operations are a tool and, they're not an end in themselves and they are warranted in some situations, they may be not warranted in other situations, and we certainly don't sell a product. We want to be supportive to responding to crisis. However, to some extent, I do believe that peacekeeping operations are also a bit of an end in themselves for the UN as an organization, because I'm convinced that the UN needs to be seen, or to put it differently, people need to see UN people in the field, close to conflict situations, close to people affected by conflict. Peacekeepers, blue helmets, civilian police officers, but also humanitarian colleagues. The UN needs to continue being a field-based operation, because otherwise, if we don't have that, then we're different. I mean, we're a bunch of people, with our gray suit, as far as I'm concerned, sitting in offices, and I think that the credibility and perception would be really different. Let me now turn briefly to how do we think we can respond to all these challenges. I mentioned the importance of, and we have currently, we're about to finalize what we call the review of all forms of peace operation. That was a request by the member states. They adopted that request as part of the Pact for the Future, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2024. And we're about to finalize that review, which covers all forms of peace operation, not only peacekeeping, but also the what we call special political mission. It can be, if you're a Secretary General envoy, you're a special political mission by yourself, with your colleagues. Now, I believe that some of the key message will be following. First, this critical message about the political nature of peacekeeping. I think it's very important to convey that message because it's a way of showing to the member states that they have their responsibility when they create peace operation. They have to understand, first of all, that they have to provide political support and financial support, which derives from political support. They have to be consistent from that point of view, but that they also have to engage in supporting more actively political efforts to support political processes. I think the other importance of that message is that we want to convey with these message that however important are what I call operational or technical improvement to peacekeeping, it would be a misunderstanding to believe that we can fix our challenges only through operational and technical improvements. That is not the case. If we don't have more support from member states, more unity, more commitment, then we will still be facing major challenges. And again, the most important of these challenges will be that we will continue to stick around and do whatever we can and put a lead on some volatile situation, but not yet achieve the ultimate goal of peacekeeping. Now, I know it's very aspirational, because essentially we're telling member states, please be more united, be more committed, all that kind of thing. I think it still needs to be conveyed to our member states. And of course, related to that really is, please, member states, if you vote and create our mandates, again, be consistent and pay. We're happy to reform. We do reform in many ways. We did, and we will continue to. But you have to pay whatever we have. You have to pay for peacekeeping. It's your obligation. Now, another thing is about mandates. I talked about these Christmas tree mandates and how difficult it can be in terms of create expectation that we cannot deliver on and so on and so forth. Yes, we will convey that message that we need prioritized mandate. We need the Security Council to tell us, we are aware that member states are mandates are ultimately created by political negotiations. So there will be a lot in those mandates, in different ways. But at least, please, member states, give us 3 or 4 key priorities that will help us really direct our attention towards achieving this 3 or 4 priorities. And it's usually about preserving peace or creating as much as possible security and protecting civilians, protection of civilians, which, by the way, should not be decorrelated or disconnected from the political objective, capacity building, human rights monitoring. Now, having said this, asking our member state to prioritize tasks in the mandates is a bit of a tricky thing to do because member states have very different views in terms of what should be prioritized, and especially what should be deprioritized, especially human rights and human rights related activities. I won't name no name, but some of our member states, including permanent members of Security Council, would not be traumatized if we remove monitoring of human rights from our mandates. But can we really do that? Bearing in mind the importance of human rights and their violations, in conflict situations. Now, the other thing which I believe we'll be really insisting on is, of course, we need to adapt peacekeeping, the existing operation, but also our ability to respond to new calls for new peace operation. Because yes, no peacekeeping operation was created, or no new peacekeeping operation was created since, I believe, 2014. So that's 13 years. But at the same time, does that mean that it will never be the case anymore? Not necessarily. And I remember a bit 2 years ago, actually, when there was a sense that things might evolve in Ukraine. We were being asked a lot about, okay, what could the UN do, in case there is ceasefire, and in case you were being called to sort of provide support to the monitoring of ceasefire, then, are you ready? Are you planning? So well, we're not really planning because first of all, we don't have the resources for that. And second, the two involved member states are somehow telling us, well, please don't plan, for different reasons. And I won't enter into that because it would be a bit too. But at the same time, we need to think about that, and we need to be ready for, it might happen to us. Or in Sudan, there are hopes, maybe, hopefully, it will happen soon, rather soon than late, that there will be a ceasefire in that terrible war in Sudan, and there are thoughts about, maybe there could be a peacekeeping operation or some sort of outfit to sort of monitor a ceasefire. So then, are we ready to do that? Knowing that if we were to create a peacekeeping operation today, especially, but that's just an example, for the purpose of monitoring ceasefire, it would have to be completely different from what was created 50 or 60 years ago in Syria or in Cyprus. Radically different. The technology has changed, warfare has changed, the kind of violations that we could be facing have changed as well. And particularly sort of the lack of deniability, a kind of violation, and so on and so forth. How are we prepared for that? How do we, for example, resort to satellite observation? Do we have the capacity? We don't have them, so we have to resort to whom? And what would guarantee the integrity of the information that we would be getting? What would guarantee that they would be clean, not sort of influenced or corrupt by other actors. All of this to say that we really have to be extremely active in working on adaptation, and we have a sort of blanket initiative under which there are lots of bodies of work. It's called Action for Peacekeeping. We updated it twice now. The new iteration of Action for Peacekeeping is called Action for Peacekeeping Impact. And under that umbrella sort of slogan, we work on improving safety and security of peacekeepers, improving the role and empowerment in women in peacekeeping, and the role and empowerment of women through peacekeeping, which we consider is a key criteria for their effectiveness, having more women in senior leadership position, and so on and so forth. We work on the digital transformation of peacekeeping, how to counter mis and disinformation, how to improve relation with the host state, conduct and discipline. Fortunately, the number of alleged cases of sexual exploitation and abuse has dropped significantly this year, but we have to be on our guard because it's a problem that is never going away fully, and so on and so forth. So all of these bodies of work have to be not only continued, but actually have to be intensified. One of the problems that we're having is that all of this is not really funded through the assessed contributions. Most of these bodies of work are funded by voluntary contribution, and of course, that is a problem, especially since we do believe that many of these initiatives and work strands are absolutely critical to improving and adapting peacekeeping. Now, in addition to that, maybe what I could say is, I talked about responsibility of member states, and here, we do have a bit of an issue with, what I call the need for strategic patience to address and, but hopefully resolve crisis, and the horizon of time in which many of our member states operate. Elected government, they have their parliament, or they have, short or medium term sort of, concerns and horizons. And we know that, it takes a lot of time to successfully sort of settle, in the best case scenarios, a crisis situation. It takes decades, and so how do we reconcile a sort of long-term perspective that we need to have and the increasingly short-term perspective of many of our member states? I'm not saying all of them, but many of them. I think the message we have to convey, again, very aspirational, is that there is a need for a strategic patience. Again, stay engaged. Our member states, could see that when we disengage prematurely, then, it's usually bad news for the situation from which we disengage. Certainly bad news for the civilians. So please, member states, also look at that and don't sort of rush to conclusion without having really looked at what the added value of peacekeeping is, of the added value of having the UN involved in. Now, perhaps by way of conclusions, not exactly in conclusion, actually, it's, we like I said, I mean, we have lots of challenges that many of them are not new. They have been exacerbated. They're increasingly sort of constraining the way we do things. But lately, of course, we had this major financial, cuts resulting from the political evolution in, again, our biggest financial contributor. Now, the other thing that we hear is more sort of about, what is it exactly that the UN should be doing, and one thing that we heard is back to basics. UN needs to return to back to basics being peace and security. I think it's worth discussing exactly what is, even if you look at, okay, UN focus on peace and security, but what is germane to peace and security? What is essential? Are human rights disconnected, or can they be disconnected from pursuing durable peace? What about development? What about dealing with inequalities? So I'm just flagging this to you because I believe that if you talk about back to basics, then it's what is behind that? How do we really? And I do agree with the fact that the UN cannot do everything and probably cannot do everything at scale. So it's a question of partnership, who does what. But at the same time, I also posit what I believe is an obvious evidence that the UN remains, and sorry because it's so evident, but I will say this, it remains quite unique by the universal composition of it. We are the only organization, all the member states, all the countries, or pretty much all the countries in the world, I mean, except of a few which are not fully, sort of the status of which has not been fully resolved, at least from the UN point of view. Now, that leads me to another thing, which is, and again, I won't be too long on that, but all right, we're a member states organization, fine. But today, we cannot engage only with member states, and there is a dilemma there. First of all, because civil society is critical, and we need to interact with civil society because they're an active player in whatever we do, but also they shape the policies, or they contribute to shaping the policies of the government, at least in some countries. Maybe a shrinking number of them, I don't know. But in addition to that, we have non-state players which are today much more powerful than many of our member states. And that will increasingly be the case. Now, on the one hand, we're seeking to sort of try to contribute to the governance of these, particularly of these big tech guys, tech companies. On the other hand, we have to interact with them because otherwise, we will be out of an important game, and not interacting with these important players is, and by the way, it's not new because the UN has initiated for quite some time in a more sustained contact with the private sector. I'm personally not convinced that you can throw public sector everywhere, and particularly as far as peacekeeping is concerned, there's very much a limit to that, aside using them as contracting, partners. But I think we have, again, something that we have to, again, I won't belabor that too much, but I believe that it's important to think of where we are in terms of, the way the organization was conceived, so many member states, 192, and at the same time, so many actors that are really way more powerful than those member states, and how do we also prepare ourselves for evolution that could make that trend even more visible and pressing. Now, related to that, though, and is that I do believe that yes, the UN is challenged. The UN is, you could say, there's so many violations of international law. somehow, at least in the mind of some, it corrodes even the notion of international law. And I remember, I don't want to sound pedantic, but in the memories of Talleyrand, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, 200 years ago, he was saying the same thing about that, where there were so many wars and disruption caused by my compatriot Napoleon that at some point the sense was the notion of international was corroded, and the sense was, everything is permitted. So we have that obligation as UN and those committed to multilateralism, but primarily to international law, to avoid that and to reverse that. Now, I do believe, and I will end up with this, that the UN is different from the League of Nations. We have 192 member states. The very fact that many of them are developing nations, many of them have relatively weak capacities. They feel that the Charter, the UN, international law is a protection. Of course, it's violated so often, but at the same time, and sorry for stating the obvious, but if you don't have international law, you cannot even state what the violation is. And they also do understand that those multilateral efforts at dealing with key challenges like climate change, global terrorism, the illegal, transnational illegal activities, and migration, and all of this, most of the major problems that we're facing today are of a global nature, that they cannot be effectively dealt with by one member state or a group of member states. And I believe that in the case of peacekeeping, we saw very clearly that as a UN activity, UN peacekeeping is very, very strongly supported by the overwhelming majority of member states. Now, when you look into specific cases, of course, you have all kind of division and tension that are, of course, that emerge. But I think that it's a cause for optimism is maybe a grand word. I won't use it, but at least, I do believe that multilateralism, given the kind of challenges that the world is facing, is the true realism. It's not some sort of idealistic kind of a dream type of approach. It's the true realism. And I think that, we would really be trying to sort of convey that because of that, we need to, be committed, work very hard to, again, preserve our organization, i.e. preserve international law, the Charter, and as far as our modest sort of niche of peacekeeping, do everything we can so that we continue to be able, i.e. multilateralism, continue to be able to offer credible and effective responses to crisis in partnership with others. And I will leave it at that. Thank you for your kind attention.
I am the head of the Department of Politics and International Relations here at Oxford, and I just would like to say a few very quick thanks. I promise I will be brief. Putting together an event like this takes a huge amount of work, and so I would just like to say thank you to Joe Anthony, to Matt Brack, and to Bev Cousins and their teams for all the work that they have done to help us hold this lecture at the Natural History Museum this evening, and also for all the work they have done in helping us facilitate and organize and running the fellowship program. I'd like to thank my colleague, Professor Richard Kaplan, for opening the event this evening, but also for pioneering this initiative with the DPO. We are very proud of this partnership in the department and very proud of this program. As Richard outlined at the beginning, this is an 8-week program that has brought together 10 fellows, practitioners from the United Nations to Oxford to undertake policy-relevant research. We are hoping, and what we would like to try and do, is to bridge the gap between academia and between policy and practice. It is my sense, and I think the sense of my colleagues, that that gap has been growing over the years. And so these UN practitioners have had an opportunity over these last 8 weeks to continue the vital work that they do from a different theoretical and academic perspective. And I know our faculty and our students have hugely benefited from their interaction with those who are actually performing the work that we study on a day-to-day basis. It has been wonderful to work with the DPO, so thank you so much. And this leads me then to thank our speaker this evening, Under-Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix. It has been our honor and our pleasure to host you here this evening. How opposite it is in the current context that we gather here to consider the challenges facing peace and peace operations in today's fragmented world. And in your talk, you compellingly outlined 4 challenges for peace and peace operations today. It is not a cliche to say we have returned to a period of conflict and heightened geopolitical tensions probably not seen in the world since the 1930s. I certainly don't remember a period in my lifetime when the threat to peace has been greater. Now, more than ever, there is a need for multilateralism. There is a need for the vital work that the UN does in the world. And I think the Under-Secretary General's talk just reinforces the need for practitioners and academics to develop that space to try and tackle and consider some of the challenges that peace operations, and the United Nations face. So thank you, Under-Secretary General, for such a timely, challenging, and interesting talk. And finally, just before you clap, let me thank all of you in the audience for coming this evening. I know many of you have waited 9 months for a dry and sunny day. And I think it is a testament to the interest that people have in this topic and a testament to the interest that people have in hearing our speaker this evening, that you join us in this windowless lecture theatre on such a beautiful evening. And so I would just ask all of you to join me one last time in thanking our wonderful speaker this evening, the Under-Secretary General.